And I tried to very discreetly blend into the elevator, like, I did not want to get his wrath, right? And he was going on and on, and, he really did start, he was like, and in a pause when he was breathing, taking a breath, I heard somebody stifling a laugh, and I thought, who the fuck is crazy enough to do that? Right? And we all, there's almost 200 people there, extras, crew, all the special effects people. We all looked around like, who's the fucking fool who would do that? And we looked over, and it was my very young daughter sitting in Paul's chair, offset.
Welcome back to our Part 2 coverage of Total Recall. If you haven't seen Part 1, make sure you do that first. Otherwise, let's continue with the timeline. Ronald Schwarzenegger and Dino De Laurentiis shopped around for many directors like Richard Rush, Louis Teague, Russell Mulcahy, and Fred Schepisi. Even Paul Verhoeven was considered at the time, but he didn't want to do science fiction. They were all considered, but Dino took a liking to David Cronenberg because he had just worked with him on the film called Dead Zone. Cronenberg signed up for the job, and he spent a year working on the script, and he is noted to have written 12 separate drafts. One version, with input from Cronenberg, added more mutant ideas into the film. In this version, Walter Quayle goes to recall, and it's uncovered he's a secret agent. When he gets home, his wife attacks him, but she escapes and is never heard from again in the film. He is helped by a video phone of himself and is given things to help him remove the tracking device from his skull. Disguised as a little person, Quayle heads to Mars and is chased constantly. While on Mars, he meets up with Benny, who drives a rickshaw bicycle, who will later betray him. Quayle finds Melina and teams up with mutant members of the Mars Resistance that is led by Quado. There was a subplot where a double of Quado is in the film to fake folks out. There is a scene where the emissary from Recall tries to convince Quayle he's dreaming, but his pleas don't work. One odd thing about this script is that both Quayle and Melina are actually mutants. Quayle's mutant ability is to see 3 seconds in the future, and he utilizes it once in the film. Quayle finds the Martian machinery and creates a force field around the planet, which serves as a force field from the domination of the fascist Earth, which is really the baddie of the film. The enemy to Quayle and the Resistance is a shadowy government looming, and there is no personal bad guy to fight against. Other insights in some of the script changes had Quayle actually being Chairman Mandrell, who was a dictator of Earth who suffered an assassination attempt on his life, and Cohagen coerced him to go under so he could confront the organization that suppressed his memory. This is turned on its heels later when Cohagen says he's a nobody who is a tool, so Cohagen can use him to take over Earth. Quaid then kills Cohagen and becomes the identity of Mandrell. In some of Cronenberg's scripts, he also evolves Schusette's original idea involving mutant animals known as Gansey bulls, who lived in Martian sewers. Cronenberg basically made them mutant camels. Despite all these script changes, Shusett wasn't pleased. When Shusett read some of his versions, this is how he reacted, according to David Cronenberg.
Well, you know what you've done. You've written the Phillip K. Dick version. We want this movie to be like Raiders of the Lost Ark Go to Mars.
Shusett and Cronenberg just couldn't come to an agreement about the tone of the film. Shusett and Dino wanted the film to be fun and not as gritty or dark as Blade Runner. Cronenberg wanted William Hurt to lead the film, and for the film to be very serious, with the main story being about identity and memory, and he didn't want to make the movie any other way. Some of the other actors considered at this time were Christopher Reeve, Jeff Bridges, and Matthew Broderick. Arnold Schwarzenegger wanted to play Quaid very much, and he was currently becoming an item because of Conan the Barbarian. He was also very close to Dino because he was already filming a Conan sequel for the producer, and he was also about to appear in a film by a budding director named James Cameron. This is what Arnold said about trying to get the part. I've been chasing it for years, years because Dino De Laurentiis had it. And he always felt, Schwarzenegger, I'd like you to be Conan. I don't like you to be in Total Recall. I have Jeff Bridges. But the producers of Total Recall did something unexpected that really upset Cronenberg when they decided to cast Richard Dreyfuss in the lead role against Cronenberg's desires. The moment Dreyfuss was cast, he wanted to have the character be an everyman persona, which he was known to play in many films. He also requested to meddle with the script himself. With all the deviation from what he wanted to make, Cronenberg finally decided to quit, and Dino threatened to sue him for attempting to leave the project. However, Cronenberg diffused the situation by assisting Dino on other ventures. After Cronenberg left the project, it still plagued him years later. As a fan of Phillip K. Dick, my dissatisfaction with what I envisioned the film to be and what it ended up being pained me so greatly that for a time I suffered a migraine just thinking about it, akin to a needle piercing my eye. Years later, Cronenberg would be offered to return to Total Recall before Paul Verhoeven took over it when things fell apart, but Cronenberg said no, citing that he did not want to argue with Shusett again. In December 1984, David Lynch's Dune, produced by Dino, came out, and it was a bomb financially. With a 40 to 42 million budget, it only made 30.9 million domestically and 37.9 worldwide. Dino was disturbed by his losses, and because of this, he wanted to keep Total Recall's budget under control and cheap. So he demanded that Mars be stricken from the story completely, but O'Bannon and Shusett were totally against this. For the next few years, the picture went back and forth because the script never felt right and the budget seemed too high. Finally, in 1987, Dino went back to hiring Richard Rush to direct the movie. Rush made the stuntman and was on board with Shusett's idea for the ending of the film, in which Mars would have an atmosphere. However, Dino just couldn't grasp it and financially didn't want to back that. Rush didn't last long, like many of the other directors, as Dino passed on him due to the ending debate. Dino simply refused to go to Mars. However, Shusett was dead set on it and stood his ground.
I don't even want to go to Mars. And I said, well, you can't take that. It's in my contract, He said, it'll never get made. I said, fine, I'd rather never make it. And I said, Mars is in and Mars gets here. It'll work. This is the first ending that's worked.
It was then that Bruce Beresford was sent the script by Dino to get his opinion. And Beresford told him that the idea for Mars having atmosphere was beautiful. This caused Dino to finally change his mind. Bruce was hired for the film, and Patrick Swayze was cast this time as the lead for Quaid. While Bruce Beresford finished filming Her Alibi from June 27, 1988 to September 1988, set construction began. Everything was set to move forward and start filming in late September, but this didn't happen. On August 1988, DEG filed for bankruptcy for multiple reasons. Although many could see this coming for a few years, the crew of Total Recall did not. Instantly, the entire film and progress had to be scrapped. The sets were destroyed, and 80 crew were fired immediately. The film was 1 month from principal photography. Bruce called me at Christmas and said it was over. I was stunned. My wife was crying. We figured that was it. It was finally over. There was so much against it. I didn't think there was a chance of anyone buying it from Dino. Now, for disclaimer's sake, I searched around to verify the possibility of Shusett's quote about the call taking place around Christmas, because the times don't add up with this claim. However, impartiality and thoroughness demand I mentioned it. The fact is that DEG went bankrupt in August 1988. It's possible that Beresford and Shusett tried to find backers to buy the expensive rights from the bankrupt company, but I couldn't confirm that at all, and this would explain a December phone call. What is well known is that Arnold Schwarzenegger swooped in quickly to grab the rights for himself. As soon as I read that, I said to myself, he owns Total Recall. He convinced the owners of Cronenberg Pictures to purchase the film's pre-production and rights. After Arnold's phone call, they owned the film within hours. Arnold stated up front that he would be the lead of the film. The studio had wanted to make another movie with Arnold because Red Heat was successful for them, so they agreed and the deal was made quickly. Schwarzenegger was given great power on this film. He had final script approval, hiring approval, around $10 million salary, and 15% of the profits. Literally, the next day, it was immediate action. That's the way those guys operated, Andy and Mario. With Schwarzenegger on board and Kuroko firmly behind the film, everything was fast-tracked, and Arnold quickly called Ron Shusett.
Get ready, pack your bags, we go. Go to make the movie. I said, what movie? He says, isn't there a movie you've been trying to make for about 10 years? I said, oh, it's in bankruptcy. He said, well, I just took it out. Back up.
On this film, Arnold basically had creative control. He kept Shusett as a screenwriter and co-producer. By the time Verhoeven came to the project, the script had gone through many drafts, which involved Shusett on all of them, with the help of Dan O'Bannon, John Poville, Stephen Pressfield, and David Cronenberg. Schwarzenegger hired Paul Verhoeven because he loved RoboCop. It was Verhoeven who brought in cinematographer Joss Vacano, production designer William Sandell, and Rob Bottin for special effects. The first thing Verhoeven did was read all 30 versions of Total Recall. He wanted to bring on a new writer, Gary Goldman, to revision the project into a Schwarzenegger-worthy project, with all the stuff Verhoeven liked from earlier script versions. I worked for 9 months on the rewrite. Paul is pretty exacting in his script development. He respects his writers, and he wants them on the set, which is rare in Hollywood. Goldman refined everything, and would even turn Hauser into an ally of Cohagen, so the spy could infiltrate the mutants. The idea of cutting off the air to the colonists made Arnold very happy, because it made him more a hero when he saved them. When production officially began, there had been 7 directors, 4 co-writers, and over 35 drafts of this film. But Gary Goldman wasn't finished with rewrites, and during filming, the script was often changed. The first order of casting was the 2 lead women, who needed to be athletically capable. Anyone who was not in shape and couldn't keep up with the action believably were not considered. Within 3 days, Sharon Stone and Rachel Ticotin were cast in their respective roles. Sharon stated that she was treated as one of the guys on the set, and that it was Michael Ironside who always helped her up whenever she was thrown down or tossed around by stunts. Ronny Cox was a given for Verhoeven, especially since Verhoeven worked with him on RoboCop. Rick Baker was precisely picked as Bob McLean because he was a smooth talking car salesman type, and they wanted that character to exude that. Michael Ironside was someone Paul Verhoeven wanted to work with. Ironside was up for RoboCop, but was passed for Peter Weller because Weller was small and looked less bulky in the costume. Verhoeven offered Ironside to play one of the villains in the film, but he had just recovered from a serious illness and didn't want to play a crazed baddie like he had just done on Extreme Prejudice. So Verhoeven kept the actor in the back of his mind. When Total Recall came around, Verhoeven wanted Ironside, but some producers did not want him, and it suggested it was Shusett. Verhoeven gave Ironside dialogue that would require him to beg for his life, even though it wasn't in the film. Ironside went all in and ended up pleading on the floor while Verhoeven filmed it. When done, Verhoeven looked at everyone and said, "He has the range to play this part. He stated he will do," and no one gave any argument in response. Principal photography began on March 20th, 1989, and the production would be 22 weeks with a $48 to $80 million budget at studios in Mexico City. There were 10 major sets for the film. Writers Gary Goldsmith and Ron Shusett were there all the time with Verhoeven and Arnold, and they constantly worked together on the script during filming. Now, the unique thing about filming this movie was that Verhoeven demanded this movie be filmed in sequence. Ronny Cox was the first to arrive in Mexico. He recalled how the studio was desperate to save money on the expensive film and wrote about his experience with his travel. I remember getting a call to ask me, "Ronny, the actors have agreed to fly coach down to Mexico. I know we're supposed to fly you first class, but would you agree to fly coach too?" Dumbfounded, I replied, "Are you telling me that Arnold Schwarzenegger has agreed to fly coach?" There was a pregnant pause. "Oh, well, not Arnold." I said, "Well, no, not Ronny." I also heard the production team actually called some of the actors to say with a wink, "Listen, we're going to be shooting on X and X dates. If you happen to be in Mexico, there's a good chance we'd hire you." Actors were literally going down to Mexico on their own dime, and they weren't receiving a per diem, a daily rate, or lodging. And on the days they weren't working, there was no compensation. Talk about cutting corners. Ron would commute between 2 films at the same time to be in total recall. When he was not in Mexico, he would fly to Yugoslavia to film Captain America. Sometimes he got confused as to which part he was playing from week to week. Cox's first scenes were him talking on the monitor to Michael Ironside's character, or filmed him addressing the citizens on Mars TV. However, after getting a cast of his head with Rob Bottin, Cox noticed his hair was slicked back, and he immediately realized that Cohagen should look that way with slick hair. Cox went to Verhoeven and took a picture of his slicked back hair. I didn't know how best to approach Paul. As we all know, his reputation for having volcanic temper when things go south is well deserved, as well as being well documented. So you can imagine my dread of how he might react to my creative suggestion, particularly in light of the fact that he was under increasing pressure over the budget. But I took a deep breath and said, "Paul, I want to show you something. I know we'd already shot a couple of scenes, but look." I showed him Rob's photograph. He glared at me for a long time. "I'm angry at you, Ronny. You know why? Because I'm going to have to shoot those 2 days again." He had an impish smirk. One of the main problems shooting in Mexico City was the smog. Every person breathing in that city at that time was noted to be breathing about 2 packs of cigarettes a day while in that location, and many got sick because of it. Though the air is cleaner today, back then it was a problem. Another problem was food sickness. The only person who officially avoided sickness for the entire shoot was Ronald Schwarzenegger, because he was a germaphobe, and Arnold only got sick one day when his cook was out sick. Everyone else got sick constantly in the beginning as they adapted to the food and water, and bathrooms were in high demand on the set. The production was a constant slog, and Verhoeven worked very hard to give it a unique slant. When the studio was agitated with long takes by Verhoeven, Arnold always backed his director, so there was little hostility. There were tensions on set, especially when Verhoeven put his foot down when the crew was not in sync. One such occasion was the Mars spaceport scene. At the end of the day's work, Verhoeven told everyone that the shoot was going to get a lot harder and everyone needed to do better. Verhoeven got very heated and downright hostile towards the crew, and if you remember the start of this video, Michael Ironside recalled that moment. It was then that his daughter laughed, and she was sitting in Verhoeven's chair. Verhoeven went straight for the girl, and it almost appeared that he was going to attack her, and everyone in the room was looking at Michael Ironside to see what he was going to do. Ironside followed Verhoeven, ready to intervene. When Verhoeven got to the girl, this is what happened.
And he said, "You think this is funny? This is humorous? We're here for your fucking entertainment?" And I went, "That's it, fuck." And I was just getting to him as he was getting to her, sitting in his chair. And she took a deep breath, and she said, "You got your shot, didn't you?" My daughter. Paul stopped right in front of her, and he went, and he calmed right down. He went, yeah, I got my shot.
After the moment, Verhoeven asked the girl if she read the script, and she replied that she didn't. In response, Verhoeven told her to get off the set until she read it. So, the little girl said it was cool, hopped down from the chair, and left the set. With the ordeal done, Verhoeven turned to see Ironside standing right behind him, ready to grab him.
And he looked at me and he smiled, and I realized it had all been an act. He had done it to kind of create this atmosphere of authority, or you know what I mean? It was like, because we had 5 more months of shooting. And he looked right at me and smiled. I was close enough, and he said, "You ready to go back to work?" I said, yeah, you know.
Later that night, Ironside needed to study a script and couldn't find it. He found it with his daughter, who read it. The next morning, Ironside couldn't find his daughter and was told she took a car to the set. When he arrived, he found Verhoeven sitting in his chair talking to this little girl while she was drinking a coffee. Michael asked what was going on, and Verhoeven turned calmly and said, "You're in early. Well, you might as well go into makeup. We might get to you soon. But leave us alone. We're discussing creativity." Arnold was the opposite of Verhoeven in that he was constantly trying to lift spirits on the set. He would arrange styrofoam snowball fights, water pistol battles during dinners, and threw parties for the 6-day-a-week overworked crew. He was also very supportive of everyone personally, as was his reputation on other films, and it's well documented and known. During filming, Michael Ironside was trying to get in touch with his sister, as she was sick at the time, and Arnold approached him in concern. He learned of his predicament, so Arnold took Michael to his trailer and used some contacts to find the exact hospital room in Canada where his sister was, and called her using his international phone. This is what Michael remembers of the moment.
He was so wonderfully supportive. He says, "You got to do this. You got to keep your attitude happy. You got to do this. Make sure your diet. I'll talk to the dietitian if you want. Blah 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 blah." And they went on for about 20 minutes, and he handed the phone back to me, and my sister said, "Who the fuck was that?" I said, "It's Arnold Schwarzenegger." And she says, "Give him the phone back." And she said, "If it was anyone else, I wouldn't listen. But it's because it's you, I will listen." For the next week and a half, 2 weeks, I found out from my sister, he called her every lunch hour. I didn't know about that. He'd call her to check up on her. That's who Arnold is.
Ironside would continue telling tales that revealed more about Arnold's character. One time, after breaking his sternum, Michael left the shoot for a short bit. When he returned, he found Schwarzenegger sitting in the lobby of the hotel, and when the big man saw Ironside, he quickly summoned him over.
"I saw Field of Dreams. Have you seen it?" And I said, "Yes." And he started to cry. And he said, "What is it you never got to tell your father?" And I told him, and he told me his. And he gave me a big hug, and he said, "Now I can go to sleep." And he went to the elevators and went up to bed and stuff.
And this was the way the shoot went. It was long and difficult, with Arnold fostering a family environment, with Verhoeven sometimes losing his temper with theatrical flair. The shoot would finish around mid-August to early September 1989 and was estimated to have a budget between $48 to $80 million. As always, Rob Bottin's makeup and effects were astounding, and it should be noted that Total Recall was part of the last line of films to really embrace practical effects. Because a year later, Terminator 2 would take the box office by storm, and all the studios would want to repeat the digital effects seen in that movie. By 1999, the majority of filmmakers would pretty much embrace digital effects completely. When it came time for the film to get its rating, the MPAA stated it was too violent, especially with Benny's death, which involved entrails and such. So the violence was toned down considerably so it could get an R rating. Carolco, like many studios, feared the competition of the 1990 summer. The most feared film was Dick Tracy, who everyone thought would be a huge success to the level of Batman. To avoid Dick Tracy, Carolco decided to release the film 2 weeks early, to June 1st, so it would not release during the same week as the classic Cop. To promote the film, a teaser trailer was released and showed nothing about the film. It tested terribly and Arnold hated it. He demanded a new trailer be made to show the action and special effects to help the audience get an idea of what folks could expect from the movie. For the merchandising of the film, a novel was released for the film by Piers Anthony, and to be honest, it reads more like soft porn than a standard novel adaptation. During the first act of the book, You can't go a chapter without body part descriptions and who is lusting after who, with deep descriptions, especially in the first bed scene between Doug and Lori, which goes into graphic and obscene details. The soundtrack was released on cassette and CD, and movie posters were also available. There was mail-order collectibles, as you can see here. Most was standard stuff, but you can see the comic adaptation of the film in the bottom corner. The Total Recall video game was released on multiple platforms, but most notably the Nintendo Entertainment System. The game was a side-scroller and had a few unique themed levels where you fight a boss inside the weapon checkpoint area, and one of the bosses was Benny in a mini drill vehicle. There was also a handheld Acclaim video game. A really neat thing for card collectors like me was the Total Recall trading cards. Originally, the cards were to be released in packs, but Pacific Card Company backed off the idea since the movie almost got an X rating for violence. Instead, the card company released the cards in a box set with a higher price point to deter kids from getting them. A neat thing about this set is that it came with a space shuttle ticket, recall receipt, Mars money, and a Martian rock. However, a lot of folks didn't even know this set was out at the time, so it sold very poorly, and even today they are obtainable fairly cheap. When June 1st, 1990 came around, Total Recall was released just before Steep Competition came out. At the time Recall was released, movies like Pretty Woman, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and The Hunt for Red October were still holding on to the top 10 slots at the box office, while newer films like Cadillac Man, Bird on a Wire, Back to the Future 3, and Firebirds tried their best to claim the top spot. They would all lose to Total Recall, which opened strong, claiming $36 million in its opening week. The following week, on June 8th, Total Recall would lose that top spot to another 48 Hours, which made $5 million more than Total Recall that week. On June 15th, the week Dick Tracy came out, it became a battle royale at the box office. Dick Tracy crushed the competition as expected, while Gremlins 2 failed to dethrone another 48 Hours or Total Recall from the number 2 and 3 spots. Total Recall stubbornly stayed in the top 4 spots when Betsy's Wedding, RoboCop 2, Days of Thunder, and Ghost Dad came out. Recall finally showed signs of fatigue when Die Hard 2, Die Harder, and the Jetsons movie came out. At that time, it fell to the 5th spot. When Ghost, Adventures of Ford Fairlane, and Quick Change were released, Total Recall fell to the 8th spot, and finally, as Arachnophobia and Navy SEALs were released, Total Recall fell to the 10th spot. It had an impressive 9-week run considering the competition, and the movie would linger for a few weeks, but in the end, the film made $119.4 million domestically and $141.9 internationally, giving it a final tally of $261.3 million. In our next and final video covering this film, we are going to do something a little unique in our coverage with this movie, so we hope to see you then, and we really want to thank all of you for getting us over the 5,000 subs mark. Our next goal will be 10,000 and beyond. We are also very glad you are sharing this journey with us, and we really appreciate you.
Thank you. You love me. You really love me.
As always, if you like what you see here, click like and subscribe. Use Super Thanks. It helps.